Bruce King, and second generation Mexican American, filling the role of impacted member of impacted community.
Thank you. I think we have Ian, James, and I'll ask Representative Hickman to also introduce himself. Ian?
Good morning, everybody. This is Ian Yaffe. I'm with Mano and Mano, and I'm here representing an organization that works with immigrant communities.
Hi, James.
Hi, everyone. This is James Mile. I'm a policy analyst at the Maine Center for Economic Policy. I'm representing an organization with economic policy experience.
Representative Hickman?
Yes. Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'm Craig Hickman, and I am trying to help shepherd this work through, and I'm extremely impressed with the detailed analysis and the deep dive you guys have been giving consideration to these bills, and I look forward to whatever you report out of this commission. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Cheryl and then our legislative staff.
Good morning, I'm Cheryl Davis, and I am with the Maine Department of Labor State Workforce Board, and I am provided administrative support for this commission.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Walsh. I'm the Communications Director in the House Majority Office, and I'm providing support for this particular initiative.
Hi, my name is Reggie Parson, Legislative Aid and Policy Analyst in the Speaker's Office, and I'm also providing staff support to the Permanent Commission.
Thank you. Thank you all. Any folks on the line that did not get a chance to introduce themselves? Any guests? Okay, I'm not seeing any. So today is a pretty exciting day. We are really coming around the corner for producing a report on a process that started several weeks ago, in which we took 454 bills that were still before the 129th legislature. We reduced them down to 152 bills. From there, it was reduced to 52 bills. And now we are looking at 46 bills for consideration that will have the highest priority impact on racial disparities moving forward. We are at 46 bills. We have reviewed 28 of them. 12 of them fall into what we're calling a tier 1. 14 fall in what we have relegated to tier 2. And then 2 of them are being removed but referenced in the report. So we have 18 bills to go. They fall into about 5 different categories. You should have an updated spreadsheet with just the bills in that order as I've described. Just make sure everyone has the use of that spreadsheet. We will be going through it in detail. Great, and thank you, Reggie, and Katie for making sure that was updated, and Cheryl. We do have some information today. We'll go through these 5 categories fairly quickly, and then as the agenda shows, we will move into a voting round. We're hoping to finalize this list today. We'll then switch our gears and start to talk about the themes and topics that we want to go into our report, and we'll let Joby and Isaiah and Katie lead us in that discussion. And then finally, we'll talk about a time frame and a meeting schedule. So you have all of that information in addition to the spreadsheet and kind of the review that the report writing committee gave us to think about. We also got some information from James related to a couple of bills. Though 3 of those bills we'll review in the education section of the bills, and then one bill, 836, I'm actually not finding. So before we get started, I'm going to ask James if he will point us into the direction of 836. That was information that you provided us saying it should stay in tier 2, but unfortunately, I'm not seeing it on the spreadsheet. Did I miss it, James? I did miss
Sorry, I
it.
might have got it wrong. Maybe I gave
Nope.
it the wrong bill LD number.
No, I did miss it. It's in healthcare. You were right. It's listed in healthcare.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have gone through healthcare. We're getting ready to start at basic needs, but let's just talk one moment about 836 and let the information that James provided us to be articulated. Do you want to talk to us a little about 836, James? It was.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is the bill that would provide funding for school-based healthcare centers. I poked around a little bit more to try and figure out, because there were some questions that were still outstanding about the bill. So I think my understanding is that, when this bill was first introduced, so the school-based healthcare centers had state funding through until about 2017, when the last administration cut them in a budget. There was funding that was restored on a one-time basis, and then which I think was for 2017-2018 fiscal year. And then when 836 was introduced, I think the intention was to have it to be ongoing funding to, continue that one-time funding and the funding that used to be there before it was cut. The governor actually restored that funding in her budget, the $600,000 a year for the 15 school-based health centers. So now 836 is potentially, doubling the amount of money that the state would give to that, and so would potentially allow it to have up to 15 more centers. So I think that's why there's like a couple of different versions of the bill available. And then I think, as I laid out in the email, there is, I think one of the things that felt important was to know where the existing health centers are, and so what populations they serve, and to see whether the populations that we're particularly concerned with already have coverage, or whether those are being left out of the existing system. It does seem like, some of the districts, the school districts that have the largest student bodies of color do already have the school-based health centers, like Portland and Lewiston. So this bill wouldn't necessarily help them, but there are also some gaps. So it has some potential to, help funding if it were directed towards those areas. But as we know, the bill doesn't explicitly state that right now. So I think it has some potential, if it were modified a little bit, so that the department sort of, when it's asking for proposals for people to start new health centers for this money, if the department prioritized closing racial disparities as part of that proposal process. So that would be, that's kind of, those are my thoughts on the bill right now.
Comments from folks? I found this very, very insightful, informative, and I'm just wondering if, it's that kind of specificity that will really make this report ring true to people. They'll be able to see how a racial justice, a racial equity lens is used and applied. So while 836 was on our previous spreadsheet, it is not currently on the one we're working from. I wonder if Joby and Isaiah, you think this is a good example, keeping it in tier 2, but using it as an example in our document to point out how bills could be refined in order to meet the impact, in order to have impact.
Yeah, this is Isaiah. Just, yeah, I agree with that, making it tier 2. I know I'm the person who showed as restraint on including it last time, but I think knowing that there's already centers there and that there's potential, which a lot of these tier 2 bills have potential but aren't specifically directed, it falls into that category. So I think tier 2 is a good spot for it, and then talk about what would make it tier 1 in the report. Sounds like a great way to approach it.
So I'm sorry, I just want to make sure. So we should keep it at, as James has recommended, Isaiah, we'll keep it at tier 2 and note in the report how to demonstrate, as James says, how to demonstrate a need and commit to closing the racial disparities in health. So you're okay with leaving it at tier 2 with that note?
Yeah, I just thought that last time that we struck it from the list because we weren't totally sure on like if it was going. Like we
Yeah.
didn't want to, but yeah, I agree with that.
Okay. Joby or anyone else?
I disagree with that as well. I do agree with that.
Okay.
I think adding that extra context in the report, like you said, is sends an important message, and that just shows the level of detail that we put into this process.
Great. Seems like everyone else does understand. I'm not seeing any objections. So thank you, James, for doing that work. And it looks like we're in agreement that we will reference it in that way. We are going to go through, we're at, if you look at your spreadsheet, we're on basic needs. And for the bills that are already listed here as tier 1, we're not going to redebate them unless someone really has an objection or there's more information, because we've gone through some of the discussion on these bills before, and they've ended up in tier 1. So if you will, let's see, the LD 920, I'm wondering if Representative Hickman, I think you spoke to this about supporting local fruits and vegetables purchases. I'm not sure we need any more information about it, unless folks would like to hear from Representative Hickman on the impact. Anyone object to keeping it in tier 1? I am not seeing any objections. So it will stay in tier 1. LD 1134, set aside federal block grants for certain communities. Do we need any more debate on the use of these CDBG funds? Any further debate? Not seeing any. We are now at 1403, also a tier 1 from this commission. This is an act to amend the general assistant laws governing reimbursement. No? Okay. Quickly moving on to basic rights. Tier 1 is 759. It feels like we talked about all of this before. Am I in the right spot?
We are repeating ourselves.
Yeah, I think we got through basic rights and we left off at housing and homelessness.
I'm so sorry about that. Thank you, because I was like, this feels deja vu. So we'll go to housing and homelessness. 1909, tier 2, an act to support emergency shelter access for persons experiencing homelessness in Maine. I'm going to ask if anyone knows about this bill or debated it in their subcommittee. 1909.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
This is unrelated, but I just want to mention that I believe Dr. Medford is on the call now.
Thank you. Let's see. Well, it is with great pleasure that I interrupt our process here, our meeting here, and welcome our newest and final member of the Permanent Commission. Very, very pleased, very, very pleased that we were able to invite, and she accepted, Dr. Marcel Medford, who is in the sociology department at Bates College. This commission, we talked about Dr. Medford in hopes that she would accept our invitation, and Bruce King and I updated you all as to our conversation at the last meeting. Would like to take a moment for Dr. Medford to quickly introduce herself, and again, just offer our sincere welcome today. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Medford.
Hi, thank you for having me. I apologize for being late. I'm sure, like many of you, was on another board meeting. These things, this work is definitely ongoing, and it's an honor to be here with you all today as you're walking through your efforts. And so, in that capacity, right, as the academic person, I'm happy to be here. Happy to be a member of the Bates community, the intellectual community in Maine, and definitely a part of that collective working towards realizing racial justice for our groups here. So thank you once again for having me on board.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you. And I will ask if you have all of the materials that you need in order to participate in these discussions. And I hope that everyone will take individual time to introduce yourself to Dr. Medford as we continue our work. So make sure to connect with everyone. Great. So we are on LD 1909. Again, I'm going to ask if anyone has any information about this bill that they could share. Yep, please jump in.
Information I have is it's very difficult to be homeless. And I know this money is directed to low barrier emergency shelters. And low barrier means easy access, and that's what we want. And I can't figure out exactly where it goes because it says outside of the what does it say? Outside the funding formula set forth by Maine State Housing and Rule 99 for homeless solutions. I don't know that rule, but I hear people talk about homeless solutions, and it's not part of that. Homeless solutions, I understand, but it's saying it's not part of that. However, we're in a housing crisis, and there are people sleeping in tents in cars, sleeping in hotels, sleeping in people's hallways, people sleeping in the park. There's people all over the place that are unsheltered, you know, that are homeless, but not in a shelter. The shelters are overcrowded. That's a lot going on. So I tend to want to help anything homeless access money. Just
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh.
Jump in.
This is James. I'm happy to give a quick, I think this was in my subcommittee, I believe. I think it was Representative Brennan's bill, and he gave a pretty good case for it. I think one of the things that's going to be helpful, one of the things that's good to know is when we checked in on the like point in time count for people experiencing homelessness, that population is much more likely to be from a community of color. I think on the 2019 count, 26% of the homeless population was Black or African American in Maine, for example. So I think there's a really good case that this is for this being a racial equity bill.
thanks, James.
I would agree with that. I would also like to add, just from the COVID relief work I've been doing at Maine Equal Justice, trying to support the homeless services system and prevent evictions. We are looking at an unprecedented level of evictions in front of us in the coming months. And just anecdotally, I don't have data about this, but my supervisor happens to be 30 years at Pine Tree working much of that time on evictions. And if you want to see the racial equity impact of that work, just go to the courthouse one day on eviction day, and you miss it. So I know that's anecdotal, but I just wanted to share that because we happened to have that conversation this morning.
Anyone else want to talk about this bill? I think the next bill we're talking about, 1404, is to provide support services. And so they pretty much go hand in funds to prevent homelessness. So community-based services. So 1909 and 1404 really could be discussed together. If you want to pull that up.
I have some information about this bill. I think it's a good bill. We should keep it. I just wanted to point out that section 1 of the bill, which creates a group to look at sort of a process for requesting funds through the Medicaid system to provide support services for chronically homeless folks in housing. That simultaneously, while that bill was being debated, the state of Maine had actually already applied for a grant to do that kind of investigatory work. So a group has been put together, and that is in process now. So section 1 of this bill actually would be moot, but the rest of it is really important. Section 3 in particular creates it actually reinstates an old emergency housing fund called, I forgot what it was called, but the acronym is THAP, and it's a program that basically provides some emergency rental assistance for people who are just over income from getting things like general assistance. So I would support this bill staying on. I'm not sure about tier. I could go either way. I just think that if it stays on, it would be worth noting that section 1 of the bill is no longer needed in case legislators want to amend.
Madam Chair,
Yes, please.
I was going to add on to the comments. I think to suggest like a tier, I think because it's so disproportionate when it comes to homelessness in Maine on who is affected, that this in a way is quite direct, just because of how bad the situation is. And so I would support making this a tier 1 bill, but that's just my inclination at the moment.
Thank you. Others, any other comments? I would also support that. Anyone object to 1909 tier 1? Are we also talking about 1404, Joby, as tier 1?
I'm not sure.
Okay. So we'll do them separately. 1909 tier 1, I'm not seeing any objections. So we will move that into tier 1. 1404, it looks like it has a $500,000 appropriation, provides ongoing funds to assist low-income individuals become stable. It clarifies DHHS examine opportunities. Is funding from the temporary housing assistance funds changes initial language to be consistent. This is DHHS to report out.
Yeah, so sections 1 and 2 of the bill, those are the sections that are basically moved because that work is already happening right now.
Yeah.
Section 3, the temporary housing assistance fund is the one that I think we should support. It's a small fund. It's for people with an emergency, like their car broke down so they can't make their rent. It's something that they can go to a certain number of times a year. So it's good. I don't think it's the most impactful. I think it maybe tier 2 would make more sense.
Others?
Yeah, I'm sorry if I missed it. Is there an idea of how those funds would be distributed? Does that say it in the legislation in terms of if it's going through CAP organizations or whether it's just money that's allocated to be distributed?
This program traditionally was administered through CAP agencies. So I think it would be administered by them again, but I'm not sure.
All right. I mean, if it's not in the excuse me, if it's not in the language, you know, I don't know. I'd like to see some of that stuff included in terms of like how those funds get distributed, but maybe that's not within the scope of the legislation itself. But I do think that has an impact on who accesses those resources, you know, based on which channels they're coming through.
What would you like to do with this?
I mean, if it's just about allocating the funds, I'm in favor of it. You know, and then figuring out if there's a way that we can just make a note that, you know, that those things are going to factor in. Or maybe I don't know if we factor that in, but I think in the future that should be something that we consider, because when we went before the Appropriations Committee, we talked about you know, some of the traditional avenues with which services get distributed and what are the limitations of those. So I just kind of want that consciousness to carry forward, you know, so that we can make sure that some of the people who are working within the communities more actively are in on, you know, are seeing that money and able to utilize it.
So you want to put it at tier 2?
I'm in favor of it, yeah. you know, like I said, I just want to make sure that consciousness is carrying through. That's all.
Yeah, and I think that Bruce, throughout the report, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Katie, Joby, and Isaiah, but I think that is one of our major points in the report is direct investment and figuring out those channels where funds can go right into our communities. I think that is a major theme of the report, actually.
It is. It is.
It is, Madam Chair, if I may. I'm not sure if this is too much work, but I think it would be worthwhile for any bill that's tier 2 to have contextual information about why it's not tier 1. And I'd be
excellent
happy to try to draft something around that on this bill in particular, Bruce, and check in with you.
Excellent. Katie, did you want to weigh in on that?
I was just going to note that so far the way we've been starting to frame it is having in like the preamble of the recommendations explaining that many of the bills that are tier 2, it's because there wasn't specific language about the impacted communities. And then we were going to put some sort of like asterisk or something next to all the ones where that applied. And thus that kind of meant like across the board, it should be tweaked in order to address the specific communities. I think that perhaps actually writing something about every tier 2, given how lengthy the list is, might be a too much to take on if in with the thought of trying to kind of wrap this process up. But I think open to both ideas, and especially once everybody sees the report, hopefully early next week, then everyone can weigh in on which method they prefer.
Yeah, thank you. So let the record reflect that this bill 1404 is tier 2, and it may or may not have some language prescribed to it.
Representative, I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
If I can interrupt, I think there was a question about where this money is going to go to, and I happened to look on the fiscal note. It says the money that is going to be appropriated is going to go to Maine State Housing. So my assumption is it's just going to be funneled through existing channels already established with an agency, but I can double check on that.
No, I don't think that's necessary, but thank you, Reggie.
Okay.
That makes perfect sense. Yep.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
1426 is increased protections for land installment contracts. I know nothing about this bill at all. I'm not sure. 1426, it is a tier 3.
Madam Chair, I know a lot about this bill.
Okay.
Nationally, unfortunately, I don't have data in Maine, but nationally, this is very much a product that targets African-American communities. It's a predatory financial product. It is a way for people, oftentimes entire communities that are credit starved because they don't have access to fair and affordable mortgage loans, that they are often aggressively marketed to with these products called land installment contracts. It's kind of like when you get a mortgage and that means the property is owned by you, but you owe the bank money. This is kind of the reverse, where you never get ownership except you're paying into this loan with the hope that one day you pay it off and then the title gets transferred to you. But what happens is that it never gets transferred. And it's really just a way to extract wealth from low-income individuals. It is a problem in Maine, and I was hoping to be able to try to get some at least anecdotal data on the racial impact. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do that, and I apologize for that. But it is well documented that nationally it very much targets communities of color. So for that reason alone, I would argue, I don't see why that would be different in Maine. I would argue that we at least make it a tier 2. I do think that housing, and I think no one would disagree with me, is a huge racial justice issue. And I think the more we can do on that, is particularly with home ownership products, which I don't think we have any other bills that are targeting them right now.
Madam Chair,
Yes, please.
I'd like to add a little more to that. And it's more anecdotal, but my father grew up in like a black community in Ohio, and this was a common situation as well. And sometimes the people who are in these systems don't even know it, and then like when they go to like move out or some sort of thing like that, they don't even realize that like the house wasn't theirs or something like that. I'm sorry if it's a little bit, like I don't have a ton of information, but I just want to say that sometimes it's done without knowledge is what I've been told.
Yeah, I don't know if James, I hate to ask, but I'm wondering, James, if there is a reference for any, well, if we can use wealth gap data in this analysis.
Yeah, I think we potentially could. We certainly have housing ownership information, which might be a more specific version of that, so we can point to the really low rates of home ownership among the communities of color in Maine. So I can pull that if that's the kind of thing we're looking for.
Yeah, my question was so that I hear you, Joby, and it seems like an important bill that helps make a value statement. It helps make a statement about disparities, even if we don't have the specific data. So I think we kept a dental bill or something like that for the same kinds of reasons, knowing that this is a disproportionate impact. So if we can connect wealth gap data and some home ownership data, we may be able to try to make the case around the impact. Based on what Joby's saying, I have no objections to actually moving it to tier 1, but I'd love to hear from other commissioners.
I'm in agreement with that. I do understand how it works. I've seen it happen, the same type of mortgage or car payment that a person never owns. I've seen it happen with houses in Worcester, but not here in Maine. But it's easy to happen. I'm poor and I finally get a house and I'm so happy and I'm paying all this money, but it's not even going into owning the house. It's all these other little things. But I'm excited to live there. And then I die and my kids think they have a house and they don't have a house. I mean, that's how it, plays out. That's usually how it plays out, right, Joby? I don't think I'm assuming that. I think that. And I did learn that that's something that, as far as Black and Indigenous, or BIPOC people, excuse me, having housing and owning housing in Maine. I don't know that. I know there's like a big gap compared to white folks. But what little if we get, let's not get it robbed from us.
If I may weigh in again on, I support the idea of making it tier 1, even if it may not be present that we know of. I think it's a protection that's important to have, regardless.
Thank you. I see Keith Bisson's on the in the call. Keith, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself? And thank you for being here. Keith? I'm not sure you can hear me. Keith from CEI, do you want to, I see you've joined us.
You're on mute.
Okay. Well, for the record, let it show that Keith Bisson, who represents community development financial institutions, community development corporations, is with us now. So Joby, just go back to you real quickly. Tier 1, tier 2, you've heard some of the discussion, and thank you for that background information. Based on the way we're doing our formulas, tier 1, tier 2, I think we're all open to whatever makes the most sense.
I mean, I wonder if the right balance is tier 2, but adding maybe another bucket in the next section of the report of the importance of housing and its connection to the wealth gap. I want to stay true to make sure that we are holding up as tier 1 the bills that in their design are meant to are targeting communities of color. This bill, unfortunately, doesn't do that explicitly.
So tier 2?
Yes, and I wonder what folks think about holding up housing ownership, home ownership as an issue. And there is definitely data that's Maine-based. I've seen James's.
That question, Toby, Toby, I didn't
About
get
putting,
that.
yeah, the question is tier 2 in this section for the 129th legislature. And then for the 130th legislature or future legislatures, a section on the importance of home ownership and its contribution to the racial wealth gap.
Thank you. I missed most of it. I think my computer froze, so I apologize for.
Sure,
Joe-
I'll try to say it again really quickly. So for the 129th legislature special session, we would recommend LD 1426 as a tier 2 bill, only because it doesn't specifically target communities of color, though we do believe it'll have a disproportionate impact. But then to also in the next section of the report, include a section on the disparities around home ownership and its contribution to the racial wealth.
Great, thank you. I hope everyone got that. And I'm sorry for the buffering. And we saw in the chat that Representative Hickman made a suggestion around that. But thank you, Joby, for that clarification. We will quickly move on. It is 11:45, almost 20 minutes to 12. 1572 is the Maine Fair Chance Housing Act. Again, we've talked about this in the past. This is around second chances. Unfortunately, the bill was amended just to continue to study it. I do think it's at tier 2. It may want to stay in tier 2 just so that we can highlight that the original bill was really where we should go for opening up opportunity to formerly incarcerated individuals in the state of Maine. The amendment is quite a ways away from there, but because it applies to both private and public housing. So I don't know if we can move it into tier 1 based on what we've been talking about, but I don't know. I'm anxious to hear from Bruce or Joby, anyone else who touches this bill a little bit.
Was this your bill?
Yeah.
Representative? Okay, so I think I testified on this particular bill, but can you give me some clarification on the specific amendments that were incorporated?
Yeah, I mean, this is a second chance bill, and so it follows fair chance in employment and fair chance in higher education, which we didn't pursue this session. We let it die in committee. But this is the ban the box bill. And I'd love to put it at tier 1. I don't know what folks, because there's just no debate on the disproportionality. We know the rates of incarceration, and we know what criminal history records do to BIPOC populations. And so this is a bill that tries to give everyone a fair chance. It's an anti-discrimination bill.
But what were the amendments that
we
were
amended it? We worked with Maine State Housing Authority. We worked with public housing authorities. We worked with the private rental market, and we were able to get them to agree to forming kind of a work group that would continue to look at housing discrimination based on criminal history records. So it is an absolutely good step in the right direction. The original bill would have taken the question around if you had a criminal history record right off the application. It qualifies you first, and then any background checks or any other kinds of inquiry are done after you've proven your qualifications. So that's the movement across the country, and here in Maine is to ban that box and give people an equal opportunity.
I think the housing is vital. I mean, honestly, like even with my own experience, I think that component needs to actually be more front and center. But at least in my experience, when I've done research around this stuff, it's really hard to totally enforce that. But I think you take it off of I mean, I say it in every meeting I'm in, especially with workforce, is that Maine is a handshake state. If you can get in front of people, there's usually ways to work things out. And so I think that the importance of ban the box stuff, because yes, you're always going to have those background checks after the fact. There doesn't seem to be any way around that. But if we can do something around housing, which has on a national level been the hardest thing to accomplish with ban the box in areas that have been pushing that forward. I mean, I think that needs to be a priority.
Yep.
That's how we make the most meaningful impact. Yes.
So would you move it to tier 1? You want to keep it at tier 2? What would you like to do?
I would defer to your understanding of how the amendments have impacted the teeth of it. I'd say before I would absolutely put it as a tier 1. Is your thoughts that the amendments strengthen that case or weaken it?
Well, it does give us one step forward. That is true, because the bill applies to both private and public housing, it does take us a step forward in non-discrimination.
I would strongly want it in tier 1 then.
Joby, anyone else? I know Joby, I'm picking on Joby just because he, MEJIP was a part of the deliberations a little bit. Where would
I'm comfortable with tier 1 because of its very explicit targeting of formerly incarcerated people. And as you said, we don't need to pretend that doesn't also target people of color.
Okay. Folks, any more comments? Thank you, Dee. In fact, I'm not seeing anyone. So, tier 1, any objections? Okay, great. We're now at LD 115, appropriate. This is a funding bill for home visiting services to provide child development, education, skills development for new parents. Anyone with information on LD 115, it was a tier 3. Looking at both the.
This is James. I could add something.
Please.
So this was in some of the information I sent already to send around. This funnels money through the Maine Families Program. So it's an existing program that, as far as I know, I've used it myself. I think it's available to all Maine residents, but I think it particularly helps to serve low-income new parents. And I included in the email some information about, I asked them for their current racial breakdown of folks in the program. And they report that, currently only 81% of the children they serve are white, which is sort of below the state average. So it does disproportionately help communities of color. And I would assume like adding the funding to it would mean that they could, continue to serve more of this population. And I think there are various studies that show how important sort of early childhood development can be, especially for BIPOC families that often don't have some of the similar sort of advantages and head start that white families do in terms of childhood development. So I'd be fine putting it as a tier 2 bill.
Thank you for that information, James. Any objections from folks, tier 2?
I don't have an objection. I just didn't understand it. And I really appreciate the information that people are sending in. So thank you, James, for that. I read it, but it made me, I got confused. It looked like the percent of children of color or parents of color was so low. But any developmental bill for children of low income is a good bill, and I would support it. But that part, I didn't understand how you justified it, but you did. So I'm missing something.
I mean, I can expand on that a little bit. I think part of the challenge in Maine is because the populations are so small. So I don't have the number off the top of my head for kids, but I think, I think the total Black population in Maine is about 2% of the overall population. So if 8% of the population of this program are Black children, then it means they're being disproportionately served. It's more than you would expect from a random sampling. But I think in Maine, I think we have relatively few areas where BIPOC folks are going to be like in the majority of people served, unless it's very explicitly targeted at them. And so that's why I'd say that's one reason why I think it's sort of a tier 2 bill rather than a tier 1 bill.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, James. And we would be able to reference the data that you provided if for that tier 2 if we go into depth around that bill. Thank you very much, James. Tier 2, it will remain. Actually, it goes up to tier 2. We are now on 1043, which was a tier 1 bill, Universal Public Preschool Programs. This is a bill that James did some work on, in which he indicated that it does close the gap and argued for it to be a tier 1 bill. Does anyone want to discuss this bill in detail? James, you want to add anything on 1043?
I think you summarized it pretty well, Representative. I was initially skeptical because I assumed that many of the larger communities already had pre-K programs, but that turned out not to be the case. There are some notable gaps. And I think the only thing to note that might be worth noting in the report is that although this program will help, it helps school districts that don't think they can afford the startup costs to start a new pre-K program, but it doesn't necessarily expand programs in existing districts. And I think there are some places where they may have a program, but it's very small and potentially hard to get into. So that could just be worth noting as an area of, that needs to continue to be worked on.
Right, and I thank you for providing us with the data. It is extremely informative. Everyone okay with 1043? It closes the gaps, tier 1. Not seeing any objection. We're now at 1050. We've talked about this bill in the past, tier 1. It would require African-American history and the history of genocide in our K through 12 schools. Has a small fiscal note of $9,000. I'm not seeing any objection to keeping it in tier 1. Seems like a fairly obvious bill for this commission to support. Great. We're moving on to 1012. This is a bill to provide stable funding and support for childcare providers. This is also a bill that James did some work on and is included in an email. He does conclude that it would have a benefit for Black children and families in particular. Do you want to add something, James?
And it took me a little while to figure out exactly how the bill was structured. So I feel like it's just worth going through that a tiny bit. This bill basically increases reimbursement to certain childcare providers, folks who are getting childcare assistance through the state, through the Childcare Development Block Grant. And I think the intention is that by, for the state paying higher rates for higher quality daycare centers, it allows people in this program to access those centers in ways that they might not be if the reimbursement rates were low, because they would be too low to be an effective subsidy, because those places are generally more expensive. So I provided the numbers that are in the email there about the folks who are already enrolled in that program, and it primarily serves low-income families, and in Maine that translates to more families of color. So I think we can keep that in here.
Keep it in, absolutely. So it is tier 1. We keep it at tier 1, and now we have the data to support it. Everyone okay with that? Not hearing any objections. Thank you. Thank you, James. 1376. This is the bill that is to amend the rules to ensure that physical restraint and seclusion policies are followed. We gave it a tier 3. I think we've talked about it before, just in terms of disciplinary policies in our schools. Anyone have any more information on 1376 or want to move it out of tier 3?
Yeah, I don't have any data on it, but I feel like it could be a tier 2. I feel like the data nationally at least seems to show that Black children and other children from other BIPOC backgrounds just disproportionately suffer from discipline in general. So my hunch would be that, this is, even if it's not happening right now, it's the kind of protection that would be useful for these kids.
I agree with Basil. I think it should stay and be at least tier 2.
I think it should be a 2. Yeah, for a lot of the same reasons, and also I think I'll be honest that the more you experience that as a youth, the more comfortable you get with it, and so it acculturates people for the prison experience, and I think that in itself is problematic.
Yeah, tier 2.
I agree, and there is Maine-based data that shows that children of color are disciplined in the school system more so than white children.
Yeah.
I know the
Please.
bill included a mandate for a report from the State Department of Education on this. I don't remember if it explicitly includes reports on use of these policies by the race of the child affected. And if it doesn't, that would be something we should recommend that's explicitly in there.
I think they have to report periodically of incidents, but not of the race of the child to the governor. It's good to collect, but.
Is Reggie or Katie, is that something we might be able to get a little more information on to include? Do we know if there's mandatory reporting? We know there's mandatory reporting, but the question is if it's categorized by race with the Department of Education.
Yeah, I can definitely get more information. So let me make sure I get this right. So you just want to know more data about whether schools are doing it, or is this something related to judiciary or something like that? Because I was interpreting it that way. Sorry.
No, I think we're looking for if in the current bill, if it would require in that mandatory reporting that race be included in the reporting.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Or,
and the FD number was again
1376. And I think what he was saying is that she thought that there was already a mandate around the collection of race data, but we don't know. So
okay, I can double check.
And if we're able to confirm that data would be collected by race, I think it changes our support for it. But we'll get more information. Right now, it's the commission ready to put that at a tier 2 until we get more information, which we'll receive by email. Tier 2, is that okay with folks?
That sounds good to me.
Okay. 1417, we're almost done. Head Start, access to Head Start to assist opioid affected other at-risk families. 1417, it's a tier 2. I think this falls into the same categories as some of our other opioid related bills, that it doesn't have an explicit strategy in our communities, but as Vice Chief Sewell always reminds us, this is a disproportionate.
Yeah, this is James. I can add some more to that. I think when we looked at the bill language, even though opiates is in the title, the at-risk categories are wider than that, which I do think includes some folks who would fall in, more folks from the BIPOC community would fall into those categories because it includes those. I think and given the I don't have it to hand, but I'll send around the information that we know on the Head Start program, like who's currently using it and then who could be using it but isn't, because there's not, these folks on the waiting list. I think there are some good reasons to keep it in for sure.
Would you like
I think tier 2 could be fun because it's not explicitly targeted, but.
So you okay with leaving it at tier 2 just because of it lacks that specificity, James?
That's my instinct, but I'm not set on that if others feel strongly otherwise.
I would tend to agree. I think it's a really, really important bill. I strongly support it. It has a very large fiscal note because Head Start is not cheap, and this greatly expands the program. But it does not explicitly target communities of color, and I think, I feel comfortable with tier 2.
Okay. I'm a little on the fence now that you said that the categories were much broader, whether it should be tier 1 or tier 2, but we'll put it at tier 2 right now and continue to think about that.
Can I ask, do we have specifics, or would somebody be able to tell me what, a little bit more in depth of what makes those categories broad, like who is included in that broader category rather than just the opioid category?
It looks like, do you know, Joe?
This is Joby. Yeah, I don't have the bill in front of me, and I don't know the specific categories, but I do know that the biggest impact this bill would have is by increasing the income eligibility from, I think it's currently 100% of the federal poverty level to 185% of the poverty level. And the goal would be to eliminate the 1,000 or so kids that are on the wait list every year. This would expand the program so that many more kids would get Head Start every year. And then it has a little bit extra targeting for these categories, one of them being families impacted by the opioid.
Yeah, it says, go ahead, James.
Yeah, I mean, I think the specific language, the way I've thought about it is that it provides a bunch of money for extra slots. It also increases the eligibility so that more people would be able to get those extra slots, as well as potentially clearing the waiting list. But then the second part of it is the targeting, so that it prioritizes. In distributing these new funds, it prioritizes areas where there's a higher percentage of non-school age children. This is the language. It says, target the extra funds to an amount based on the percentage of non-school age children who live at or below the poverty level in each provider's service area, compared to the share statewide. So it directs it to lower income, higher poverty areas, which I think is good for our purposes. And then the at-risk includes, so at-risk it defines as affected by substance use disorder, sexual or physical abuse, homelessness, a mental health disorder, or other condition that affects the emotional, mental, or physical health of the child. So there are some categories in there, like the homelessness, for example, we know is a category that affects the communities we're concerned with as well. So, but it's not exclusive to those groups because it just provides the extra funding and then tells them to prioritize some of those groups.
Yeah, and it includes sexual and physical abuse, which I thought was a plus.
Mm-hmm.
And it's children who are at risk or whose families are at risk. So I think that I'm more, please.
This is choppy, so I don't know if I'm choppy when speaking. My experience of the women in the programs that I've worked in, whether it's people that are homeless or people coming out of prostitution, usually people at risk that can access something, that have children, CPS is involved, Child Protective Services, and they don't necessarily actually pay for some of these things, but they push and encourage some of these things. And then some daycares work with some recovery programs that help moms reunite with their children to help them access daycare. But it is extremely, extremely difficult. So if there's a way that someone said in the beginning of the meeting today, that we could be able to refine it so that it does have an actual impact on the BIPOC children.
I don't know.
Thanks.
I think, James, it just, I'm now starting to think about it in a tier one, position, just because of the expanded definition of at risk. And even though it may not specify BIPOC in it, it does, we don't have to go far to know that these categories have disproportionality. It's not a big step. I would almost start tier one, but I'd love to hear from others.
I'm inclined for the tier one as well for a lot of the same reasons. And if there's any note that I would say that would even keep it out of that would be the lack of specific language. But beyond that, yeah, and I don't think it requires us to include that specific language in order to make that case. So I'd say I go for tier one on that.
Yeah. Anyone else object to a tier one at this point? I'm not seeing any. Okay, we're almost done. We've got LD 1760, which is to support children's healthy development and school readiness. This is a tier 2 bill. Please. So this bill also has a number of, it's called First for Me Early Care and Education Program. It does define the populations at risk, foster care, homeless, substance use disorder, special needs, limited in English proficiency. So it does economically disadvantaged. It does seem to help specify the population. And please.
I would strongly support this being tier 1, considering how it doesn't say like these communities, but it has all of these things, all these facets that are always going to be disproportionately BIPOC people. So I think that education is extremely important in this, and also just leveling the playing field as far as it goes into public education when children enter that. So I would really support this as being a tier 1.
Yeah. When you look at the summary, what it's doing is establishing 10 pilot programs called the First for Me Early Care and Education. And the only thing that it's not clear about is the inclusion of BIPOC and specific measures to bring those community members into the pilots. But it does establish 10 pilots and then report back to the legislature on their goal, on their outcomes in 2024. The fiscal note on this is quite a bit, actually. Yeah, around $11 million.
For what it's worth, this is Joby. I think this bill is a great bill. It's for similar reasons as the last bill. This bill actually works with Head Start. It's based on a model, a very successful model in Waterville called EduCare, and it includes supporting and training the advocacy leadership of parents. And I've seen these parents in the State House, and they're incredible. I mean, they're families with low income who are doing the best for their kids, and then they get some support to actually build leadership and advocacy. And it's an incredible program. And so to provide support for that to expand, I think would be great. But like the last bill, it's a very large fiscal note. So I'm just flagging that. I know we haven't been focusing on that, which I'm actually happy about, but I just wanted to flag that for everyone.
So we did move 1417 into tier 1, I believe, based on the last discussion. So this 1760, based on what you just provided, Joby, seems like they kind of go hand in hand if we're thinking about anecdotally the impact. Are folks okay with tier 1 for now? I keep saying for now, although we're running out of time. Tier 1, okay? Not seeing any objections. And so then our last bill is LD 420, which is the estate tax bill. James, you argued for this to be reconsidered, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the pitch I gave for it before is basically the same, which is that it's one of the few, it's a progressive revenue raising tool, which I think is, it's potentially, I think, important to include because it, both because it can fund some of the priorities we're listing that cost money, but also because it's a tax that's going to predominantly come with overwhelmingly from wealthy white families. So it's also a way to sort of address the racial wealth gap by taking some of that intergenerational wealth. And then, if we pair it with the spending bills, it's then applying it to closing the gap on the other end as well.
So your tier 1, James, is
I would be okay with that for sure. I think I don't have statistics exactly on what it looks like in Maine, but I'd be very certain it's like, 98 or 99% of the folks paying it are going to be white.
Everyone okay with tier 1 on LD 420, our last bill? I am
Sorry
seeing that-
to,
Yeah,
Madam Chair.
yes,
I'm a little hesitant on tier 1. I am just because and forgive me if I'm wrong because I don't have it in front of me. But I thought last time that James mentioned that we don't actually know where this money is potentially going. It's not directed towards the community we represent. So, like, if this tax is put into place and then it all goes towards roads, like it, not that I think would be the case, but I think tier 2 and then maybe putting in the report that we would like to see this money redistributed to communities of color, to aid in wealth redistribution.
thank you, Isaiah. Some discussion? So we have tier 1 or tier 2. Just gonna need some feedback from folks to finish up this work.
I mean, I would be okay with the tier 2 designation with the no. I mean, I think in the world where everything we recommended passed, I think the net effect of that is going to be that this money goes towards those programs with fiscal notes that we've identified. But I do appreciate that, if this bill, I think it's unlikely, but I think if this bill were like just cherry picked on its own, for example, it wouldn't necessarily have the amount of impact we like. So I'm happy to have the report note that, one of the reasons it's being included is because we want to see, this revenue going towards the other bills that we've identified. And it's probably somewhere between 8 and 9 million. They haven't done the fiscal note properly, but that's a substantial amount that, can pay for a lot of these larger bills we've identified.
That's excellent. That's excellent. That would be great. Yeah. So it would be tier 2 with that caveat. We are now at the end of our evaluation for these bills, and I just want to thank everyone for going through such a somewhat tedious process, and knowing that you were not selected to be on this commission, for your expertise in public policy, and evaluating 454 bills. So it is an enormous task that I think that we were able to get through this process. In terms of voting, Katie, I just will ask maybe, and Reggie.
Sorry, Madam Chair. I just want to let you all know I did have information on LD 1376. It's now in your inbox. It does seem it's going to require school districts to report based on race. Race is part of that report. But the only thing is, it seems like it'll be a potential state mandate that is unfunded. And some of these school units are already doing this work based on race. But the 2 links are in there for your review to determine where it should go.
And this is on the restraints, is that right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And the bill actually amends current statute. So that's what the bill is amending.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've lost it.
Let me see. I get it. It is amending. The House and Senate adopted an amendment.
It's amending the current statute,
Mm-hmm.
1326.
Yeah, it's just
So yeah. So this bill actually mandates the DOE to submit annual reports, the number of students broken down by grade, gender, and race. Yeah, I would think that would be a tier 1 for us. That we will get that data. This bill is going to start to produce that, and then to use it. And it will be aggregated by grade level. Yeah, it seems like it might be a direct have some direct impact. What do folks think? Thank you so much, Reggie. I think this goes to tier 1 for me, but anyone else? Thank you, Dave.
Tier 1.
Yep, great.
I agree.
So now that we have finished this process, it's 12:16. What I'm going to suggest, just because we do need to get to the report, our next 15 minutes. So because they've done so much work, if let's see, Katie and Reggie, if we were to clean up this, we just did a vote. If we were to clean up this and send it out by email, and then ask each of you to respond by a certain date, whether you need any changes in the vote, or you agree. Do you think we could do that by email fairly quickly, Katie and Reggie, if everyone promised to respond in a timely manner? Because we don't have the final.
Right. Yeah, we can definitely, I've been taking notes, so I can send something out. We can send something out after this meeting.
And it may be, and push back if it's not possible, if we update this document, but also create a new one that just puts all tier 1 in a row and then the tier 2.
Well,
so
and I'll throw another idea out just to complicate things, but feel free to shut it down. What we could also do, since we are so far along on the report writing and planned to send that Monday, I could clean everything up more nicely and by the end of the day Monday send out a draft of the report that has all the bills as I have heard them. And then if we did have a Wednesday meeting, you would have all seen the report for a couple of days. You could both vote on that final list of bills and change it if we need to, while also providing feedback on the overall report verbally instead of just over email. So that's an option, or more than happy to put an email together this afternoon with just the bills and do a email response on voting.
Thank you very much for that offer. Folks, what would you like to see? We would schedule a meeting next Wednesday and do a review of the report and then a final review of our votes. Or we could do it by email over the weekend. We'd still have to meet next week. It might not have to be Wednesday, but we'd still have to meet next week to discuss it. It's totally up to folks. I just need you to weigh in. Yeah, Dee?
Thanks, Katie. I love your creativity and you're ready to do it. So it sounds like if you did it that way with all the things that you've been working on in your subcommittee, that we'd have that by Monday, right? Is that what you said, by Monday?
Yes, we'd have a draft form. The very final section, since we haven't gotten to talk about it as much, will be the most drafty, but you'll have a pretty full draft.
Yeah, I'm cool with that. I mean, it's okay for me to be able to use that to be prepared to decide and talk about it on Wednesday. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I'd be okay, I mean, unless we feel like Wednesday and Friday are necessary, I'd be okay with the idea of doing, having it sent around by email to invite comments on it, and giving people time to read and digest it, and then we could review those on Friday, just to give folks a little more time, but with the idea that we could shorten what we need to do on Friday by doing some of that commenting during the week by email.
So no meeting on Wednesday, just one meeting next Friday, James?
That's my thought, but I mean, only a suggestion.
Okay. Well, we have two different kind of ways forward, which is no meeting until next Friday, doing most of this by email. You weigh in, and then Katie produces and Reggie produces a final document, or we can do an interim meeting on Wednesday, and probably accomplish the same thing. Is that right, Katie? Because we'd have material by Monday. So the question is really if you'd like to meet on Wednesday or you'd like to meet next Friday. That's what it boils down to. Katie is saying that they can turn around this material that we can review by Monday. Or on Monday, should I say. On Monday.
Correct, yeah.
Meeting Wednesday, meeting Friday, totally up to you all.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
So if there's a draft that's shared by Monday and then we meet on Wednesday, would the idea be that between Monday and Wednesday, people can provide input and then Wednesday we would vote on approving the draft?
That's correct.
Okay. I think I lean towards that, just to give us, I guess, an extra day in case there are any unresolved issues that pop up.
So we, based on that, we would just schedule a meeting for Wednesday. We would leave Friday open, I'm guessing, Katie.
Up to you, unless there's other business separate from this process that you'd want.
Yeah, no. I think one meeting next week is probably a relief for folks, I'm guessing. And whether it's Wednesday or Friday, I don't know, but the sooner the better to get this process done, I think, for me. So if it's possible to get us that material on Monday, we could review it on Tuesday and take some votes on Wednesday. The review on once we get the material, I think it really hinges on the fact that, folks provide some feedback by email about the report so that we're not taking up a lot of time during the meeting to go through it as much as we are commenting on up or down sections. And it does give us a little bit more time. I don't think if you all looked at your email for the themes and topics to be included in the report, I don't know if you've pulled that up, but there is a draft list of guiding principles. It moves into some questions about what we'd like to see in the report. So I'd like to move into that for our last 10 minutes. Let's take a vote first on meeting. I'd like to make sure that we'll have a quorum and that folks would like to meet on Wednesday or Friday. So I think we'll just take a vote on meeting on Wednesday from 11 to 12:30 for review of the report and the votes that we've taken. So if you all would just indicate if you're willing to meet on Wednesday. I know I can't see many of you, but
That's good with me, Zezé.
great. And let's see. Staff, is that Katie and Reggie and Cheryl, you okay Wednesday? Reggie, okay? All right,
Yep.
so that we'll meet Wednesday. We'll expect that material by Monday and be prepared to take some final votes. So if you could, we'll take the last kind of 5 or 10 minutes to look at the questions that have been asked by the writing committee, report writing committee. If you follow along, the list of guiding principles includes the piece around investment, that all of these things take resources. You can't just be aware of racial inequities, that action must be taken. Policies, and we talk about this a lot, about being race neutral, keep disparities in place, the need for structural analysis. And I just want to again point out to James and thank Joby and a number of other folks who have been helping us along that pathway of looking at a structural analysis of these bills. So we've had a little bit of practice in that through this process. Absolutely solutions led by impacted communities. And that's something I'm hoping that the Permanent Commission will work more on in our advisory capacity to the 3 branches, that we really figure out a way in which we broaden the discourse and put impacted communities right at the center of work. Policies that affect tribal communities and respect sovereignty. So it's a government to government relationship. And then the need to not get trapped into, we have scarcity of resources, so we cannot pursue this. We can't pursue the investments in infrastructure and strategies. Those would be the list of guiding principles. The only thing that I didn't see in there, and I'm not quite sure, I think it falls within one of these categories, and that is around leadership. And developing solutions should be led by impacted communities, but I don't know if that goes far enough about policy decisions and leadership within the body politic, within those entities, within these branches, so to go beyond, Joby, I think I wouldn't mind language that says going beyond boards, inclusion in boards and commissions, because right now there is no diversity within our boards and commissions. But I think that even beyond that, we should be putting something in here around, staffing and leadership. Because we need to have environmental and cultural impact as much as we want to see policy impact, right? There's just not enough effort around interrupting the environment, interrupting the culture of the work, similar to why we need core, so those kinds of things, Joby, I was thinking about.
I agree with that.
And it could be a place where we also lift up the tribal state task force, where that is a necessary component to how we do our work. There were a couple of bills, and Ambassador Dana, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we took the bills that were intended, 2118 and 1392, that were intended for the establishment of something internal that brought the tribes and the state together in an ongoing basis. We amended those bills for other things, but nonetheless, it could be some language in the narrative that supports that process. So I think we should add that to the section on sovereignty, and then the leadership piece in the section on impacted communities. Did anyone see anything missing from the guiding principles that you'd like to add? Thank you all for doing that work. And then we do have another section about following policies and issues in the forward-thinking section. Bruce and Isaiah, a couple of others, you'll be happy to know the ongoing investment into communities is number one, around self-determination and building the infrastructure for the communities themselves. We specifically address health disparities and pick out a couple of bills in which it's illustrated criminal justice reform, and then institutionalizing a process for racial equity lens, which would be, I think we've talked about it a little bit. Katie and Reggie, you've heard about it a lot, which is to do a joint rule around the racial impact analysis statements, utilizing that for bill analysis. 2139 and 1703, Joby, I'm not sure, they're not ringing off the top of my head. It says, note, we need to find a way to discuss 2139 and 1703.
Yeah, they were flagged. 1703, I believe, is tier 1, but Madam Chair, you flagged specifically that the original version of the bill was stronger and that we wanted to highlight that in the report. And I just didn't have a chance to school myself on the issue and how to fit it in here.
So I would be able to help Bruce. This is 1703 is the bill that is access to the Maine Human Rights Commission for redress that our currently incarcerated individuals do not have access to. It is the only population that the state actually discriminates against in order to have access to justice. I mean, it is a state-sanctioned discriminatory act that people who are incarcerated don't have the same access to justice as anyone else. And so that was in the original bill. It was sponsored by Representative Donna Bailey, and it was negotiated out in order for the governor not to veto. So I think we should absolutely make reference to 1703 in its original form. Okay, that is it. Do folks have any comments? I know we're getting long in these meetings, but I think we are almost at the end of our road and finishing the task that was before us. Is now 12:30. Any other comments about our work, questions?
Could I just wanted to mainly point out that there's going to be a little bit to add to this now based on today's conversation. I flagged a few more things to add to that last section of the report. So just so you're aware of that. And then there was that one section that I highlighted, which we probably don't have time to discuss now. So I'll just highlight it more clearly. It's not something we've discussed. We've discussed one bill related to our indigent legal services system, LD 182, but it's the problems with that system are far, far greater. And so I was thinking this would be a good place to talk about that. And I was going to reference the one bill we have discussed. I don't think we have time to get into it now, so maybe you can all read the draft and weigh in over email.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Joby. I absolutely think it should be included, and I think it's really brilliant that you connected these dots. I think the report would be absolutely lacking if we did not reference the Sixth Amendment report, the establishment of a public defender's office and staffing and everything that's contained in the Sixth Amendment report. We could circulate that Sixth Amendment report if folks were interested in it. And you can look through the executive summary is quite informative on the recommendations. This is access to justice for people who are who don't have the means, the monetary means to always receive it. So I'm in total favor of putting it in. Anyone object to it? Would you like to see the Sixth Amendment report? You can find it online as well.
Okay.
Thank you, Joby, for putting it in the chat. Any objection to including it? I don't see any, and I don't think we need any further discussion, Joby. I think it's good to be included. Anything else for folks? I'm not seeing anything else. I know it's been a long afternoon already, so we'll let you get on with your day. We want to again welcome Dr. Michelle Medford to the commission, and feels good to have a full commission. We want to thank her for her time today. Again, we want to point out all of the work that's been done by our staff, Katie, not our staff, but Katie and Reggie. We feel like part of the team now. We've gone through quite a bit of work together, and we truly appreciate everything that you're doing between meetings, during the meetings, after the meetings. You've been living with us 24/7. So thank you so much for your work. And to Cheryl, thanks for keeping us, all of our work documented. To each and every one of you, thank you so much. I think that's it. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see each other in a couple of days. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.